All right, People of the Book, third series. We're going to try to study the works of some influential Talmidei Chachamim of the 19th century. And we're opening tonight with Rabbi Yisroel Salanter. And I believe the name of the talk, I don't have the fly in front of me. The name of the talk was Laser Surgery for the Mind's Eye. We're going to be reading a passage tonight. Well, you'll see where I took that title from. But first, as I've done in my previous two series, I want to give a little historical and biographical background about the author whose works we're going to be studying tonight. The 19th century, as I wrote in the blurb on the flyer, was a time of tremendous ferment. People like Hegel and Marx were writing in the 19th century. The idea of the modern nation state had come to the fore. Nationalist movements were starting. There were various philosophical movements starting or expanding at the time. And in particular, in the Jewish world, about a century after, shall we say, it made tremendous inroads in Western civilization in general, there came a period of something called enlightenment, known as Haskalah in Hebrew. Now that sounds like something positive. Who wouldn't want enlightenment, right? You're sitting in a dark room, it's not good, you need light. However, what the Enlightenment movement basically brought to Jewish civilization in Europe was an unmooring of the foundations of Orthodox life. Basically, with the opening up of the liberalization of Western societies in Europe, the trade guilds opening up, the universities opening up, equal rights granted to Jewish citizens in many countries of Europe. Many Jews fled the ghetto, fled the grinding poverty, and a tremendous assimilationist trend started. And you can't really assimilate in general society if you're going to maintain a separate Jewish identity. As actually one of the great Maskilim said, he put it very well. He said that in Hebrew, a little pithy epigram, he said, Yoter mimasha Yehudim shomrim et HaShabbat, HaShabbat shomeret al Yehudim. More so than Jews observe or keep the Sabbath keeps the Jews. In other words, by being seventh dayers, by being people who rest on Saturdays instead of on Sundays, that set them apart from their Gentile neighbors right away. Once you drop Sabbath observance, all right, either you observe nothing at all, or you're going someplace else on Sunday, it breaks down one of the great barriers between Jew and Gentile. So again, I'm not going to dwell on it too much because it would require a whole history and sociology lesson, but suffice it to say that poverty, anti-Semitism on the one hand, enlightenment, the opening up of societies on the other hand, were laying waste to scrupulous observance in many parts of Jewish Europe. Places like Poland and Galicia, as it was known, southern, southwestern Poland, parts of the Ukraine today, Romania, even Hungary, were somewhat more insulated, if you will, from the ravages of the Haskalah, because these were the heartland of the Hasidic movement. And the Hasidic movement, from one way or another, I'll talk about a little bit more next week when we study one of the great 19th century Hasidic masters, the Sfas Emes, had a way, shall we say, of inoculating, not making totally immunity. I'm not saying that the Haskalah made no inroads in these countries, but the places where it was most prevalent were Germany and Lithuania. Lithuania, White Russia. These were the European countries where the Haskalah was most prevalent. Rabbi Yisroel Salanter was the father of a great movement, the Muslim movement. Let me tell you what it means in the popular imagination, and let me tell you literally what the word Muslim means, and we'll see as I think we read some of the the basic texts of the founder of this movement, we'll begin to see that there's not really such a dissonance between the literal meaning of the word and the more popular meaning of the word. Now, let me back up a little bit. It's hard to define a movement more than 2 centuries after it was created, because movements grow, they develop, they branch out, and I would not be doing justice to the various tributaries of this big river, shall we call it, sub-movements within the movement, if I tried to grasp the whole movement in a few moments. No more so than I would do if I was trying to define the Hasidic movement and zeroed in only on Satmar, or only on Lubavitch, or only on Ger, or something like that. There are many sub-movements within the movements. Right? But suffice to say that the basic hallmarks of the Musa movement were as follows. It's what we call today sensitivity training and consciousness raising. We didn't have those catchwords, those buzzwords perhaps 2 centuries ago, but a close reading of the works of the great Musarist, Rabbi Salanter, and his school will reveal that this was the main thrust of the movement. They were trying to reinvigorate Orthodox Judaism with a heightened sensitivity. The sensitivities of Torah observant Jews had dulled over the years. And in particular, the main 2 thrusts of the sensitivity, training and sharpening and heightening, were directed towards, in general, what we would call yiras shamayim, fear of heaven, becoming God-fearing people, once again. There had been a certain hollowing out of the tradition, where maybe Jews were being halakha observant, they were following the rules and the texts of the halakha, right? But their heart wasn't in it. It wasn't informed with awe, with a sense of religious duty, with a sense of God's proximity. It had become kind of very dry and very by the road. Right? And in particular, in Ben Adam L'Chaveira, in particular when it came to interpersonal mitzvahs. When we're talking about interpersonal mitzvahs, when we're talking about sensitivity to the needs of society, the common weal, sensitivity to others, being able to put aside your ego and your pursuit of gratification and what you perceive to be your rights, and understand that the other person has rights and needs that need to be gratified, and so on and so forth, that's where Rabbi Salanter saw an even greater failing, shall we say, than in the ritual mitzvahs. So the Musa movement sought to reinvigorate the Jewish community as a whole, and the intelligentsia of the Jewish community in particular, the yeshiva bakim, to reinvigorate. And again, you have to understand, this is not Reform Judaism. This is not what I would call a reformation. Okay? I would call this a reaffirmation rather than a reformation. What Rabbi Salanter is trying to do with his movement is basically to wake up a comatose patient, to revitalize, to bring something fully back to life. Not to create a Frankenstein monster, not to create a bionic man, a new man, but just to reawaken the Judaism that's fulsome, that's trembling with the awe of God, that's sensitive to the needs of others, and so on. Among many other things that shall we say, are very forward-thinking, that you see if you review both in depth and at length the works of Rabbi Salanter and his school and his students, are, besides these concepts I just spoke about before, sensitivity training and consciousness raising, is the effect of the subconscious. Long before Freud was writing about it, Rabbi Yisroel was writing about something called kochos chaos, the weak powers, the weak motivations that motivate people unbeknownst to them, and trying to bring people face to face with subconscious motivations. Why are you really doing this? Why are you really desiring this? Why are you really thinking this way? You think it's because of A, B, C, but I'm going to prove to you that it's because of X, Y, Z. These were some of the goals of the movement. Some of the methods of the movement were to distill, and this is where it got a little bit controversial. This is why some people mistook it for a reformation rather than a reaffirmation. And absent Rabbi Salanter's tremendous credentials as a world-class Talmud Chacham, people kind of, today is like a division of labor in yeshivas. You have an arcane Talmudic point, you go to the Rosh Yeshiva. You want your ethical development, you go to the Mashgiach. It's like, specialists. How did Ambrose Bierce say about modern medicine? The definition of being a specialist is to know more and more about less and less. All right? But Yisroel Salanter, especially since his movement really took hold in Lithuania, which was the traditional seat of Jewish Talmudic scholarship, had he not been a world-class Talmud Chacham, would have been a very marginal figure. He would have absolutely what we call today no street cred, no credibility whatsoever. Right? Before he launched his movement, he made sure basically to be an itinerant, not preacher, itinerant professor, lecturer, talking about very, very arcane and complex Talmudic topics, so that later when he would launch his movement, he would be taken seriously and not be fobbed off as, another Maggid, another preacher, we don't have to listen to him. It doesn't really hold any weight. So, I digress for a moment, but to get back, what Yisroel Salanter was trying to do was to distill from the Torah. Torah in general is the antidote to the Yetzer Hara. Famous Talmudic dictum, Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Lo Torah Tavlan. God says, I've created the inclination to evil, I've created the Torah to ameliorate it. Okay, our number one line of defense in trying to do battle, to fight the good fight, to win our moral and ethical struggles, is to abide by Torah, is to study Torah. That's how we fight the Yetzer Hara. That's how we fight the inclination to evil. What Yisroel Salanter was trying to do was to distill those parts of the Torah and those later Torah works. Torah literature is very rich and it's yet unfolding, even today in the 21st century, right? To distill those parts of the written and the oral Torah, and to distill those and to concentrate on those works of later post-Talmudic rabbinic literature that specialize in interpersonal mitzvahs and in raising the level of one's Yirah Shamayim, fear of heaven. And that was something that was considered, as it called for a change in the curricula of yeshivas, that was considered something somewhat controversial. So we've spoken about sensitivity training. We've spoken about his, I wouldn't call it discovery, but his emphasis, and even if he didn't use the Freudian term, but what we would call today the subconscious. I also want to talk about something that we would talk today, meditative practices. One of the main hallmarks, if you want to call it an innovation, of his Mussar movement was something that he and his students called Mussar b'hispailos. Mussar b'hispailos would be a person would latch on to a verse from one of the prophets, or an epigram from the ethics of our fathers, or a line, a particularly poetic turn of phrase from one of the great classic medieval and post-medieval Mussar works, the Mesilas Yesharim, the Gates of Repentance, works that we've studied in earlier series in the People of the Book. And just repeat it again and again and again, with emotion, with song, and become what we would call today, for want of a better word, a mantra. Just repeating it and repeating it again and allowing the lesson of it, as it were, to bake into one's bones and consciousness. Okay. I'm about ready to start the reading and examining the text.
Yeah. I'm sorry, can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
What do you mean by repeating? They just reread and reread and reread?
Well, most of the time it was committed to memory.
Okay.
But yeah, they would be studying during the Mussar Seder or on the base of Mussar, and they'd just be saying it again and again and again, like countless times. And some people would have the habit of, before they would start their Mussar Seder, their Mussar class, or autodidactic class every day, 10, 15 minutes first of Mussar B'Spalos, before I do anything linear, just to set the tone, to set the mood. Okay? I mean, I wouldn't call it purely meditative, but it's because you're chanting things, if you will, but that kind of an idea. Okay. The writing of Rabbi Yisroel is very dense, scholarly, poetic, a lot of biblical and Talmudic allusions. I think the translator here did a fine job, but as is often the case in these kind of works, a comprehensive, perfect job eludes anyone who would try their hand at it. It's a little bit impossible. So again, I don't know how far we're going to get in the text. Before we even try to approach the text, I want to just tell you a few anecdotes, a little epigrams from Yisroel Salanter, so you won't leave the evening like not having captured the flavor of the man. I'm talking too long and too much, but just a few pithy stories and sayings from Yisroel Salanter, and hopefully you'll get a better picture of the man. Now understand that the Hasidic movement antedated the Muslim movement by about a century and a half. So Rabbi Salanter said like this. Interestingly enough, the founder of that movement, his name was also Yisroel Baal Shem Tov. He said as follows. He said the Hasidim believe that they have a Rabbi, a teacher, a spiritual guide. The Litvaks, the Lithuanians, my people, in other words, believe they don't need a rabbi. All right? The Lithuanians were misnagdim, they were opponents of the Chassidim. We don't need a rabbi. We have our books, we study our law, we're fine. Both of them are mistaken. Well, it's my movement's for everybody. Everybody needs what I'm about to teach. But it wasn't self-aggrandizing. He was correctly critiquing a society where on the one hand, people in the Hasidic society, could show up to a gathering of 9,000, 10,000 people in some of the larger Hasidic groups, never get within 20 feet of the quote-unquote their teacher, their rabbi, have no idea what it was the man was teaching, right? And they call that a rabbi. That's my teacher, right? On the other hand, the Litvaks, being more scholarly themselves, so, I needed a teacher when I was a cheder boy. When I was in elementary school, I'm my own teacher now. The Talmud is my teacher. I don't need an actual teacher to teach me after a certain point. And that's a mistake too. You need a lifetime of development and a lifetime of guidance and so on. Okay. Point number one. Point number two. I shouldn't say point. Story number two. And there are endless stories. I'm just picking two or three to hopefully capture the flavor of the man. We all know a very sad and unfortunate part of Jewish history was something called the blood libel. Very, very often, more so in Christian countries, but sometimes happen in Islamic countries too. Before Passover, a Gentile child would be found murdered, and trumped up charges would be brought against the Jewish community that they were like vampires, they were killing the children and draining their blood to mix in with their matzahs. Matzahs, sometimes wine, they would say, various kind of libels. A very popular libel was that an ingredient in Jewish matzah was the blood in particular, of a Christian child. Rabbi Salanter came back once from baking matzahs at the matzah bakery, at the town matzah bakery. I don't know if it was in Salanter or in Königsberg, Kovna, I don't know which one of the stops, where the story occurred, but it's really inconsequential. And he said as follows, he remarked as follows. Suffice it to say that working in a matzah bakery is basically like working in a sweatshop. There's no labor unions, and it's 16-hour days, and it's dank conditions, and it's, there's a master there with a whip, not literally, but, the speed is of the essence. You cannot have a kosher matzah unless the production run is over in 18 minutes. Every 18 minutes, they're cleaning the factory, they're turning things over, otherwise you don't have kosher for Passover matzahs. So Rabbi Salanter said like this, I never understood what a terrible libel the blood libel was. Because the Christians have been saying all these centuries that we bake matzahs with Christian blood. And now I realize, we bake matzahs with Jewish blood, not with Christian blood. In other words, he was saying, the bosses of these factories should take a little bit less of a profit and create better working conditions. The matzah shouldn't be the blood, sweat, and tears of the people who are trying to scrape by and make a living, make a couple extra bucks, Passover time. So that's another story from Yisroel Salanter. And the last one, then we'll start paying a little more attention to the text. The last story is as follows. Yisroel Salanter was asked once, it seems by a Jew from Poland, from Galicia, a Hasidic Jew, whose piety, shall we say, again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, between this week and next week, but suffice it to say that the goals of the two movements were similar. They want to reinvigorate, what had become kind of a hollow by the road Judaism, but they had different approaches to doing it. The Hasidic approach was more to infuse it with mystical awareness, mystical sensibilities. So, somebody once asked Rabbi Salanter about a Talmudic figure by the name of Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler, as the name sounds, was a shoemaker, sandler, a sandal maker. Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. And they asked him, he said, what kind of yichudim was Rabbi Salanter making when he would stitch the soles onto the sandals of the shoes? What's a yichud? A yichud is a Kabbalistic exercise where great Kabbalists contemplate on various permutations of the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, and how to sequence the letters. And these are things that they do during prayer and during the pronouncement of brachos, of benedictions, and when performing mitzvahs. It's called to be miyachid yichudim, to put together the divine feminine and the masculine, the kutshabrichu and the shchinte, yichudim. That's what they're called, unities, acts of unification, or contemplations of unifications. So Rabbi Salanter said, you know what Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler was doing? You know what yichudim he was doing? He wanted to unite the upper of the shoe with the sole of the shoe. He pulled the stitches, as he pulled the needle through, as tight as possible, that his customer shouldn't be cheated. His customer should be getting a fair deal. They get a long-wearing shoe when he was done with his work. That was the yichud that he was mechaber for. There was none of this mystical stuff. In the here and now world, how do you treat your fellow human being? That was Rabbi Salanter. Okay, let's go to. One last thing I want to say before we start examining some of the texts. So I tell you what Musar means in the popular imagination. What does the word Musar actually mean? Musar basically means to be hit, to be smacked. Okay? Shma b'ni Musar avicha v'al titosh taras imecha. Hear my son, hearken my son, to the corporal punishment, if you will, of your mother, of your father, and do not turn away from the Torah of your mother. So admonishes King Solomon. There's an expression in the Torah, in the Bible, a shevet musar. It's a classic musar work by that name. A shevet is what we would call a rod. Spare the rod and spoil the child. Musar is administered with a shevet. Okay? So basically, I don't mean to say that Yisroel was an advocate of corporal punishment. I think very far from it. But the imagery of Musar, the idea of Musar meaning breaking through superficiality, breaking up preconceived notions. Okay? That is a major thrust of the Musar movement and of Musar literature, and I hope to show you that in some of the texts we're about to do. Okay, so this is a translated version of the Igeris HaMusar, the Epistle on Musar. Okay, this is one of the major documents, if you will, of the movement. This was a manifesto, if you will, where Rabbi Yisroel was writing a letter to his students, to Jewish communities, about the need for Musar study, about how to implement Musar programs into the curriculum and into the communities. That's what we're going to be reading some passages from here tonight. Okay. On page 393, or if you want to do the on the handouts, one in the lower right-hand corner, one the top page, don't any pages. Okay. Before I even start reading, and in particular before I read the underlined part of the passage, I want to ask you a question. People have been coming now to the Jewish Heritage Center for a lot of years. We're all, if not professional, at least amateur theologians. Let's do a little exercise, okay? Quick, pithy. 2 sentences or less, okay? I'm assuming that everyone here in this room believes in God. If you don't, pretend, okay? So, I'm asking you to tell me in 2 sentences or less, what does it mean to believe in God? I believe in God. Ed, what does it mean I believe in God?
have a faith that there's one big cheese in the sky, so to speak,
Okay, good. Mrs. Bennett, you believe in God?
that rules everything.
Everything what happens, this happens because of Hashem, because Hashem is the ruler of the world.
Divine providence. He's talking monotheism, one, unity. She just said providence. Elise, you believe in God?
Yes, but I don't have an answer. I don't know.
He's too big to reduce to 2 sentences.
I don't know.
Okay? So what do you believe in?
I don't
I
know.
believe that everything that he does is for the good, though we might not understand why he does it.
Okay? So a riff on what Ms. Bennett said, divine providence and he's a good and benevolent God. That everything that's happening is for the good. Yochanan?
Yes, I do believe in God.
Expand on that.
I kind of think, how can anything be without this God? How can I be?
Excellent. That's how Maimonides says God is the mechuyev hametzius, the only imperative thing. The only thing that must be. If you want to know what God is, when you wrap your mind around the concept of what must be, that's God. Yes?
It's probably something like that there's got to be something behind all this. I mean, I don't have an answer. Yes, I believe in God, but just from looking at things.
There's more to the world than what meets the eye, and that more to the world is what we call God. Yes? Hi?
I believe in God.
Okay, so expand on that.
I believe my soul, and everybody's soul, if they believe in God, eventually will go up to in heaven, and it depends on their mitzvahs and things like that.
Excellent. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Fran?
Yeah, I believe in God very strongly that it's faith and that there's a reason for everything.
Okay.
He's the ruler.
Fine.
You have to
If-
give a good answer.
Time is of the essence. I'm just working with my regular students here tonight. How about, look, the truth of the matter is, and I've cited this, many of you went to my classes where the text that we had open in front of us was the Art Scroll Siddur, and I asked you to turn in the morning service to the back pages to where Maimonides' 13 principles of faith are articulated. Right? Now, there are 13 principles of faith. Most Hashkafa, Torah Outlook teachers, maybe I'm not good enough to do this, but most of them would say they're all links in a chain. Maimonides broke them down to 13, but they're all really one thing. Right? If you believe that there is a God, then he must have revealed his will. If he revealed his will, there must be prophecy. If there's prophecy, there's got to be and so on and so forth. Right? Nevertheless, most people, if you ask them, okay, you believe in God in 2 sentences, what do you believe in? Would say some of these things. Now, this happens to be one of the articles of faith. This is part of the job description of God, I don't know, of the reality of the world. What would you say to me if I told you, you know what I believe in? I believe in that every mitzvah that I do, that every positive thing that I do will be rewarded. And that every transgression that I commit, any aveira that I do, obviously that I do not do teshuvah for, that I do not repent from, will be punished. That's what I believe in. That's my faith. Now, the truth is, Hai came very close to saying that. Yeah, that's really what I was saying. I was a little shocked when I first learned this from Yisroel Salanter. This is his baseline definition of faith. And what I think that he means is, we'll see, we're going to read a little bit, is, if it's not visceral, if it's not in your guts, okay? So you're not a religious person, you're a theology professor. Everything else, almost anything else that we say about God, okay, doesn't really affect the person's feelings and behaviors and emotions until you bring it down to the practical level. Okay? How does God relate to me? How does he react to me? How am I going to react to God? So it's reward and punishment. Right? Let me show you what I mean. 393, okay? I'm reading the passage, the Almighty is the judge. Without knowledge of contemplation. Okay, that means without thinking about it too much. We can recognize that we are aware of the belief that the Almighty is the judge. Capital J. Rendering to each man according to his actions. If a man's ways are bitter and evil, he will be afflicted with severe punishments, either in this world or the next world, the eternal world. No one can estimate the quality and quantity of the severity. And if his ways are pure and his conduct is straight, he will be blessed with the sublime delights in this world and more in the next world, with wondrous pleasures far beyond our ability to understand and experience. This awareness of the awesome divine judgment and the subsequent reward and punishment is the beginning step in our service of Hashem, may he be blessed. The concept is mentioned in the Talmud Makos 24. There's a fascinating passage in the Talmud. It's the last page of the tractate Makos. And it goes through Jewish history, and it talks about reductive, various giants of Jewish history, almost like Maimonides later on had 13 articles of faith. What are the pillars of Judaism? You know? King David came and he made 12 pillars of Judaism. And Isaiah came and he made 6. And it keeps on reducing. Right? And ultimately the Talmud says, Chavakuk, for those of you not familiar, Chavakuk was one of the prophets. We have a book in the Jewish biblical canon in Tanakh called Treyasa, the 12 prophets. 12 prophets that are bound into one book because their books are very short. So they didn't get individual books. It's 12 prophets together, and one of them is Chavakuk. I believe in English it's translated Habakkuk. Okay? Chavakuk said as follows. Chavakuk came and unified the entire Torah into one principle, that tzaddik lives by his faith. There's a pasuk, there's a verse in the book of Chavakuk, v'tzaddik be'emunaso yichya. 3 words. The tzaddik lives by his faith. Now, before I read Rabbi Yisroel Salanter, I would say this means a tzaddik lives by his faith, that everything is for the good. Okay? That God must be, I mustn't be, it's a way of ego annihilation. A lot of the other things that were said around this table tonight. I looked up the Gemara, there's a dearth of commentaries on the page of the Gemara. There's not too many of the classic commentaries say what this means. Maybe I should have looked up the verse in Chavakuk. But at any rate, Yisroel Salanter would immediately jump to the conclusion that the emunah, the faith that we're talking about over here, is the faith in reward and punishment. That's my theology. God is a rewarder and a punisher. And that's how I live. That's not what I think. That's not what I theorize about God. I live by that. That's the reducto minimus, if you will, of Judaism. That's it. Judaism in a single 3-word epigram, that tzaddik b'emunasa yichya, means faith in reward and punishment. As Chazal state, another passage in the Talmud of the Bas 78b, therefore the rulers say, come, let us make an accounting. The loss of mitzvah versus its reward, and the reward of the transgression versus its loss. Yeah? The rulers over there, the Gemara says, means this is again a biblical verse. The Gemara says the rulers, hamoshlim biyitzram. Those who dominate, who rule over their inclination to evil, over the more base impulses. Okay, this is explicit. Here you got a biblical verse saying, it's all a calculation, it's all a reckoning. Okay? I want to do this sin, there'll be some instant gratification, but is it worth it in the long run? I don't want to do the mitzvah, okay? There'll be a short-term loss, or at least a short-term suppression of gratification, or deferment of gratification, but what do I get in the long run? Okay. That verse is fairly explicit. But the Rabbi Yisroel Salanter should read into the verse of Chavakuk, that tzaddik b'emunasa yichya, it means the emunah and schar v'einish to me was a revelation when I first learned this. Okay, let me just read on. Okay, the next passage. Musar awakens heavenly fear, yet, most unfortunately, this general awareness of faith, that Hashem will judge all of our deeds, remains hidden within us, concealed in the depths of our hearts. Turn the page.
Do you have this book here?
We are devoid of conscious awareness of the fear of judgment unless we devote ourselves to till the soil of our hearts through the expansive thoughts of Musar. Okay? What he's saying over here is this. Okay? I just read 2 sentences, but if you read between the lines, he said 2 bombs over here. Okay? First of all, he is articulating the need for his movement. There's a dichotomy, ladies and gentlemen, look at me for a second, okay? There's a dichotomy between this, and more to the point, between this, and putakaran, what we call visceral, in our guts, okay? Yes, in general, We're all tzaddikim, we're all righteous Jews, we all believe that God rewards and punishes. We believe it. It's abstract. Okay? It's not part of our fiber of our being. It's not there on an emotional gut level. If it was there on an emotional gut level, we would look very different. We would behave very differently. We would speak very differently to one another. We would think very differently about one another.
Then it will be angels. So Hashem give us a Yitzhak, and we have to work against it.
We have to work against it, but we're always going to be human. We're never going to be angels.
No.
The point is we'd be working a lot more efficiently, okay, if these abstract thoughts about Gehenna and Gan Eden were in the pupuk around. We're really in our guts. We're as clear to us as the things that we look at with our own eyes. And that's what he's trying to say. Well, let me just finish the thought. He says another thing over here. To till the soil of our hearts. Okay, so he's waxing poetic. To till the soil of our hearts. This is very, very important. Okay? Remember I was telling you before that musar, the literal meaning of the word musar means to strike something, to break something. That's what musar is all about. In agriculture, okay, the Gemara in Shabbos talks about the 39 categories of prohibited creative work on Shabbos. Yeah? And the Gemara asks the question, why is plowing after sowing? In the order, okay, there's an order, there's a sequence of the 39 prohibited categories of work. The first one is zoreya, is sowing, seeding, putting the seeds into the soil. And the next one is plowing. How can that be? You can't plow without sowing. Excuse me, the other way around. You can't sow without plowing. You don't put seeds down on hard, impacted dirt. The wind will blow them away. The birds will eat them as bird food. All right? You've got to have a plowed field before you do any planting, any sowing. So I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but this was a method in ancient agriculture. They would plow a field twice. The first furrow, the first set of furrows, would be to implant the seeds in. They would stick the seeds, or they would cast the seeds into those furrows. Then they would do another plowing adjacent. It's like, like we don't live on farms. A lot of us go motorboating in the summer, right? A boat going through the water, plowing through the water, has a wake, right? So think of it also. A plow cuts through the ground and leaves a wake, right? It creates a hole, a furrow, but there are these mounds of dirt as well. They would go over it a second time. They would plow adjacent to the first furrow, and this would cause the mound that the first plowing had made to fall over and cover the seeds. Okay? The bottom line is this. Okay? Hard soil. Ooh, it's very impressive. It's hard. It's solid, right? It's sterile. It's barren. As long as it's solid, it cannot receive things to grow. All right? And it cannot grow. It cannot nurture the seeds that's been implanted in them. You've got to break up the soil not once, but twice for any real growth to occur. That's what Musar is all about. If we go through our lives, okay, with our facades, with our cherished, received wisdom, never broken, the way we look at the world, the way we look at God, the way we look at society, and most of all, when we look in the mirror, the way we look at ourselves, if it's all solid, if there's never any cracks, okay, nothing can be implanted there, and nothing can grow there. Okay? Says Rabbi Yisroel Salanter, unless we devote ourselves to till the soil of our hearts, we've got to till, we've got to plow. What's the plow? The plow is through the expansive thoughts of Musar. It's the Musar literature. It's the contemplation. It's the repeating of the mantras. It's coming to a recognition, some self-awareness of my subconscious motivations, and so on. That's what's going to create an ambiance, an atmosphere, a field where things can grow. We always talk about personal growth and self-actualization. This is it. This is where it comes from. Questions before I read on? Comments? Questions?
Well,
go ahead.
I kind of compare what you're talking, and I'm sure you'll go into it in a future class. When we learn Chassid, when I learn Chassidus, it's supposed to go from the head to the heart.
Right.
And what you're kind of saying is it has to go even deeper than that.
Right.
With the Musar, Chassidus says you're supposed to serve Hashem with joy, and here we're putting ourselves down. Chassidus, we have to break down our Eitz Hara, but here it's like a totally different concept. And I'm wondering, through the Musar, it's really serve Hashem with joy. It's like beating you over the head to You know what I'm saying?
well, I alluded to this at the beginning when I was giving my rather long preamble. I said it's very hard to take a multicolor movement and try to make it monochromatic. Okay, we're reading, a basic text over here thing. I think when he was waxing poetic, let's turn back to the first page for a moment. Okay, he talks about in one sentence, right? No one can estimate the quality and quantity of the severity, and if his ways are pure and the conduct is straight, he will be blessed with sublime delights in this world and more in the next world. So which of those do you focus on? Are you focusing on the reward, or are you focusing on the punishment? Now this is a generalization that's going to distort, but I'm going to say it anyway. Okay. Two main sub-movements that grew out of Rabbi Salanter's movement was something called the Slobodka school and then the Vardhuk school. Okay? The Vardhuk focused on something called Shiflus Ha'adam, the lowliness of humankind. Right? And the Slobodka school focused in on Roimamus Ha'adam, Gadlus Ha'adam, the greatness of man. Okay? So I don't think the two ideas are mutually exclusive. I think it's a question of emphasis. Okay? Obviously, if you're going to be hell obsessed, okay, you run a greater risk of draining your Judaism of joy. Okay? If you're going to be heaven obsessed, maybe you'll have a more joyful, but you run the risk of greater pride. Each approach has its pluses and minuses, but it's not a fair thing to say that the Muslim movement in general is devoid of joy. No, that's unfair.
It's just a general
overgeneralization.
Okay. I'm overgeneralizing.
Okay. And we've only read a few lines. Let them talk. Let them go. Okay.
She has her hand up too.
No, it's okay. That was pretty much answered.
Okay.
It's just.
You had the same idea?
Yeah, I was like, wait a second. I mean, because isn't that what we do here a little bit of like the Muslim movement? Trying to get with midos and
absolutely
right.
Absolutely, sure. Chofetz Chaim, Rabbi Turkler, I brought no train to Chofetz Chaim. Chofetz Chaim is one of the last great Muslim yeshivas, and the movement is not exactly flourishing these days. It's one of the last, bastions of Muslim left. Okay. I'm up to on page 394, I guess. I can't see it because the staple is in there, but in the handout it's page 2 on the left hand side. We are devoid of the conscious awareness of the fear of judgment unless we devote ourselves to till the soil of our hearts through the expansive thoughts of Mussar. Without making this effort, I'm reading. I'm now on the third line from the top. There's a sentence that starts third line from the top. Without making this effort, our general faith in the coming judgment does not send its tendrils over the bodily passions to bind them with the constraint of fear. Okay, again, he's waxing poetic over here. Basically what he's saying is, the tree, that I want to plant in this soil of my soul that's been tilled, that now can take seeds and can grow things, I want something that's going to act as a kind of an octopus, something with tentacles that will rein in my baser instincts. The particulars of our conduct do not emanate from the general principles of faith. Okay, this was a part of the epistle that I skipped at the beginning. He was talking about how particulars follow out of general rules. So saying we can say, I said it's a difference between what we think and what we feel viscerally. He's saying it a little bit differently over here. The general idea and the particulars of how does this idea inform every one of our actions or every one of our thoughts. So he's bemoaning the fact that our particular behaviors do not follow from the generals of our thoughts. Okay.
Meaning our Eitzahara?
Yes. We constantly succumb to principal transgressions that reach to the heavens. Endless transgressions of speech, countless unethical business practices, and worst of all, the neglect of Torah study. In short, there is no soundness in any part of our body. It's a paraphrasing a verse in Tehillim. I've examined myself from my skull to the soles of my feet, and I found it all wanting. I found nothing perfect. Nothing about me is perfect. I need work in every part of myself. King David writes. Now this sounds pretty severe, right? We're generally nice people. We're nice Jews. Isn't this a little bit harsh to say there's no part of us that's perfect? Yes, I'm an imperfect human being, but I would think that I do have my perfect parts, don't I? So that's a good segue into the next thing. You'll see I put a star over here because this is really the main passage I wanted to read tonight. If we don't have time for anything after this, at least I will have accomplished this much. And this is where I took my title from. This is especially true in the light of the statement of our sages. Quote, the greater the person, the greater the Yetzer Hara. Thus, we perpetuate grave and consequential transgressions. Yet because of the darkness in our hearts, we are as the blind. We do not see the enormity. And before I start reading the underlined passage, I just want to pause for a second. Remember I told you before, the little epigram that he said, the Hasidim think they have a Rebbe, the Litvaks think they don't need a Rebbe, and they're both mistaken. Okay? There was a certain cultural snobbery, if you will, that obtained in Lithuania, that the Hasidic masses, they're unlettered, they know how to dance a nice dance, and they know how to sing a nice song. But when it comes to Talmudic scholarship, okay, you think you're better than them? You think you're greater than them? Understand what that means. With great opportunity comes great responsibility. You're greater? You're full of pride? You're full of quote-unquote Torah pride? You have the bigger Yetzer Hara. You're capable of more grievous sins than they are. You understand what I said before? That the idea of the greatness of man and the lowliness of man are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they often go together. All right? I call it the absolute value theory of spirituality. All right? A -5 is greater than a +4 in terms of absolute value. All right? The potential is there for both greater good and greater evil. You really fancy yourself a greater individual? How can you say you don't need a Rebbe? I know how to learn a Blat Gemara myself. I understand, but the temptations for you, you're a greater Torah scholar. The temptations for you are greater. You have a powerful, a more potent Yetzer Hara. Now, this seems counterintuitive, We know rabbis. We know Rebbitzins, shall we say. We tend to think that as your scholarship level goes up, your piety level goes up. Those are the nicer people, right? Those are the more ethical people that we know.
Gets to your head.
Listen to this. Let's read on here. Okay, I'm starting now from the underline. And this is what I meant when I gave the title, Laser Surgery for the Mind's Eye. Only if we view them through the magnifying lens, the healthy intellect looking through the lens of the faithful Torah, only then do we perceive the great overwhelming seriousness of our transgressions. For instance, now listen to his mashal here. Even though the size of a star far exceeds the size of the earth, nevertheless, it appears to us as a small point of light. Yet when viewed through a telescope, the star appears a bit larger than when viewed with the naked eye. However, in truth, we cannot conceive the true enormity of the star, and so it is with our transgressions. He's saying as follows, okay? Torah is the laser surgery for the mind's eye. What I mean, we all hear the ads on the radio spots, those of you who have TVs, I imagine there's TV spots also. Right? You got these big athletes coming in saying, before I met Dr. Nicholas, whatever his name is, I needed contact lenses, I needed this, it fogged up, I wore glasses, it fogged up in the rain, my hand-to-eye coordination was no good, and now I have 20/20 vision, I have 20/10 vision. Right? We have corrective surgery today to improve, to sharpen people's vision. We all have distorted vision in our mind's eye, even if we're not wearing corrective lenses, even if we're the rare Jew who doesn't need to wear glasses. Right? It's a genetic thing. All right? In our mind's eye, we need corrective lenses or we need corrective surgery. A star is nothing. A star is not, it's a little pinpoint. My lashon hara, it's nothing. It's dvarim shel mabekach. It's inconsequential. It's a dust mote. It's literally nothing. Have you examined it through a telescope? Have you looked under a microscope? let me not go freelance. Let me use his metaphor. The telescope of the Torah, in particular, the Musar portions of the Torah, the distilled Yerushalayim parts of the Torah, okay, will help you get not an artificial enlargement, okay, not like on you're on your desktop computer and 100%, 150%, 400%. You can artificially enlarge things. There's nothing artificial over here. We're helping you get in touch with reality. The reality is that a star is huge. You're tiny. And the star is huge. You can't see that? Here, we'll give you an aid. We'll give you a visual aid to help you see it a little bit better. This is what I meant before when I spoke about sensitivity training and consciousness raising. Okay? We're clods. We're self-absorbed. Okay? And we step on somebody else's toes. Literally or figuratively. Okay? You just brush past somebody and step on their toes. You don't think about that. You might do that if you work in a crowded office with a lot of cubicles. You might do that 10 or 15 times a day. It's nothing, If the other person's oversensitive about it, this is New York City, grow a thicker hide. What's the matter with you? You're the one with a hang-up, not me. No. You're the one with impaired vision. You need your consciousness raised. You need your sensitivity heightened and sharpened and trained. You need your mind's eye to have a little corrective lens put in. You don't see how big a deal it is, but it's a big deal. Every human being is a microcosm. Adam, Olam, Cotton. Every person is a small world. You save one human being, it's as if you saved the whole world, the Gemara says. All right? Imagine the Exxon Valdez, if you did a toxic spill and you ruined, 500, 800, 900 miles of pristine coastline. You're an eco-terrorist. You're a war criminal. You're a terrible person, right? What do you mean in terms of the whole world? What's 500 miles? What are you talking about? You made animals extinct and you ruined fishing for the next 20 years. We don't know what we do when we hurt the feelings of other people. We're klutzes. We're all collectively. We're all a bunch of bulls in a china shop, right? Because our sensitivities are dull and because our vision is impaired. And without Musar, without the distilled parts of the Torah that speak to Yerushalayim and speak to the inherent worth and value of every human being, we will go through our lives looking at these stars as little pinpoints of light that are ultimately inconsequential. There are millions of them. They look tiny to me. What difference does it make? I do look at it. I do pay attention to it. I don't pay attention to it. Now, what I find most striking over here about his metaphor is, he says the telescope will help you only so much. Okay? He didn't have space travel in his time. If he did, maybe he would speak about that too. Okay? I'm sure the astronauts on the Apollo landings who made a moon landing had a much better sense of the enormity of the moon than even astronomers looking through the best telescopes. Right? But absent that, there's only one possible thing that can give you the true proportions of what a star is. And what is that? Not your eye, not the finest telescope, not even one with two eyepieces, not even a binocular. Okay? What's the last thing he says? However, in truth, we cannot conceive the true enormity of the star. We can't conceive it? He says so. But how might we possibly conceive it?
But they, right?
How about by imagination?
Okay, imagine.
You need to use your imagination. You need to say, hey, 1 second here. The optician tells me that this has, 700, 800, 12,000 magnification. And I see how much bigger, if the star with my naked eye looked this big, okay? And now with the telescope it's looking this big. So if I was only 1,000 miles away from the star, how big would it look then? But that's already human imagination. That's not rational, that's not inductive. I need an imagination. And what I find striking about this is that at the beginning of this epistle, I skipped that part, but basically Salanter says the imagination is our mortal enemy. Our rationale is the good guy, and the imagination is our enemy. But to me, what he's saying over here is, you need Musar, You need the Torah to improve your vision, to raise your consciousness, but you also need a strong imagination to build and expand upon that. Yes, Elise.
No, I didn't understand that.
You know what? Let's read a little text. No, I don't have it here. Do I have the? I'm sorry. I left the book that I photocopied from. You know what? I'm going to give you a running translation. Humble me. I'll try to give you a running translation. The epistle on Musa begins with these stirring words. Poetic. I'm not sure I understand them myself, but this is what they say. A person is free and unbound in his imagination, but restrained in his rationale. His imagination leads him into wildness and in the way of his heart and his desires, such that he is fearless from the inevitable future, the time when God will call into remembrance all his deeds, and when he will be punished with severe punishment. No stranger shall be imprisoned on his account. He himself will have to bear the fruit of his sin. One is the sinner and the punished one. Bitter is it. Let no man say, this is my illness, but I can bear it. I'm skipping one sentence. It's not really, it's just too poetic to translate. And then he ends very pithily. He says, woe to the imagination, this horrible enemy.
But don't you need an imagination in order to study Torah in a sense? In order to...
That's what I'm saying. I'm admitting I don't know how to square away these two parts of the text. I think he said it himself over here. He said the telescope only gets you so far. The telescope also doesn't give you a true picture of what the star is. Okay? Let's not talk about, a Talmudic tort. Let's talk about understanding what sin is, what a sin is. All right? Musar, the texts of Musar can only get you so far. They'll give you a telescope. They'll make it bigger than what you thought it was before. But to truly grasp what it is, I mean, he's not saying it explicitly, but I think, he's leading the witness. What time is it now? It's already 10 after 9? Mm-hmm. All right, let's see if we can get in one more passage over here. I did... Okay, I'm just doing this because the other one's going to take long. On page 3, 396 in the original print, there's a section that begins in the all caps letters. A great obstacle blocks the path to tshuva. Mm-hmm. Let's read that, and I'll just get up to the underline, and then we'll call it a night. This being so, as long as our souls remain within us, we should quickly correct our course to the good. Yet there is a great obstacle which blocks our path. We do not fear the day of death, even if we mention it with our own mouths. Stop. Okay, so again, he's giving another example. Okay, we believe in God and that he rewards and punishes, and that actually requires a leap of faith. You look at a world where the wicked prosper, where 95-year-old mafiosi, die, blissfully falling asleep in their own beds, surrounded by friends and family, and where little, 3-year-old children get tortured to death and starved to death in Darfur. It takes faith to believe that there is a God who rewards and punishes. But death requires no leap of faith. We're surrounded by death. We see death all the time. Okay? Nevertheless, again, it's one of these things where there's a disconnect between what we believe intellectually and what we feel viscerally in our guts. This is stated in Chazal. Perhaps you will say that death has been forgotten. Also, if we see with our eyes the death of people like ourselves, it does not move our souls to repent with our full hearts to our Creator. Yet ultimately we will come before Him for judgment, and He will rebuke us for all the evil we have committed. This most common reaction, that is, indifference and apathy to what will take place after our demise, is just the opposite of what it says in Koheles. it is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. House of feasting means like to a wedding, to a bar mitzvah, a bris, something like that. For that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Right? If I go pay a shiva call, if I go pay a condolence call, if I attended in the summertime Rabbi Zone's classes on dealing with death, okay, that's very instructional. That really may pay off more. We're talking about you don't want to have a Judaism devoid of joy, but if it's all let the good times roll, then you're missing something very vital too. You're missing the most vital thing. It's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. You've got to be aware that there's going to be a tab that has to be paid at the end. For that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Now the underlined part. Our numbness to the fear of judgment and the necessity to repent before our demise is due to the multitude of sins that have dulled our hearts, that have become as hard as stone. Okay, this is something very, very fascinating. And again, this is not Reform Judaism. This is not a reformation. This is a reaffirmation of something that it says in the Talmud. In particular, the Talmud is talking about the sins of a non-kosher diet. There's a unusual spelling somewhere in the Torah. When the Torah is talking about the effects of a non-kosher diet, it says v'nitamtem bam, which literally should mean you will become impure through them. Right? The unkosher species of animals are referred to in the Torah as impure animals. Okay, a hog, a camel, a bear, they're called impure animals. Right? And it says v'nitmeisem bam. But the way it's spelled without an aleph, it can be pronounced v'nitamtem bam. V'nitamtem bam basically means, okay, you will develop a blockage. To which our sages say, Macholos asuris metamtemem libay shaladim. Says forbidden foods, okay, create blockages in the hearts of human beings. Now this doesn't mean high cholesterol diet.
Is that the Rambam? Is that the Rambam?
No, the Rambam is quoting the Gemara,
okay.
the Talmud. Right? This does not mean a high cholesterol diet. Although I don't know, maybe studies have been done to show that beef is less high cholesterol than pork. I doubt it, but whatever. We're talking about over here leiv, as it's used throughout the Bible and throughout the Talmud, as the seat of understanding, as a seat of wisdom. Okay? You lose your wisdom. The conduits of wisdom that are supposed to flow into the human heart suffer from a kind of arteriosclerosis from ingesting a non-kosher diet. He says in general, his movement, the Mussar movement, the Mussar literature, is about sensitivity raising, to sharpen our sensitivities. Well, how did our sensitivities get dull and numb in the first place? Through sin. And it becomes a vicious cycle. Okay? The more you sin, the less sensitive you are. The less sensitive you are to God, to death, to the needs of other human beings. And being insensitive, you become a bigger bull in the china shop. You do more damage. And the more damage you do, the less sensitive you become. And it's these dull sensitivities, okay, that he's trying to create an antidote for. He's trying to counteract. It's not just Torah is the nemesis of sin. Okay? They both create either vicious or beneficial cycles. You learn more Torah, and in particular the Mussar parts of Torah, your sensitivity gets raised, your consciousness gets raised. You sin, you ignore those parts of the Torah. It's not just the actual sin that you did itself. It makes you dull to it the next time. And I'm going to close with it. It's not in the book that we're reading tonight, but another famous epigram that's attributed to Yisroel Salanter that I really think speaks to this last idea of his that I spoke about was, there's a famous saying in the Talmud that he put a little addendum to, but it's so profound. The Talmud says, Kiven sha'avar adam avera v'shana ba nasis lo keheter. When a person does a sin and then repeats the sin, it becomes permitted. Psychologically, the taboo is off. The first time you do it, there's certainly a sense of taboo. I'm going to push the envelope. I'm going to do something I've never done before. Right? You feel guilty. You feel fearful. You want to make sure nobody's watching. Whatever. Right? If you're lucky, you do teshuvah immediately. If you are unlucky enough to transgress the sin, okay, once the moment of indiscretion, once the moment of passion is over, you cool down, you collect yourself, okay, I have to repent from what I did. Then hopefully you will recapture or maintain your sense of taboo. But if you do it once, and then you repeat it a second time, that's it. It becomes absolutely permitted to you. If there are times now in the future when you desist from the sin, you think, oh, I deserve extra credit. I didn't have to not do this. I could have done this. God, you better give me some brownie points. You better give me some extra credit. It becomes something permitted to you. Said Rabbi Yisroel Salanter. V'kivan shehishlish ba, if you do it a third time, nas is like a mitzvah. Now it becomes like a holy cause. Now you've got to justify yourself. Now it already becomes a whole movement. I did it 3 times, Okay, ladies and gents, that's my class for tonight. Next week we do the Sras Emes, one of the great